"Don't let that man touch my car," Charlotte Whitmore said, and every person inside the glass-walled showroom turned to look at the single father standing near the service doors with a cardboard box of parts in one hand and his little girl's backpack in the other. The prototype sat in the center of Whitmore Crest Motors like a wounded silver animal under the white showroom lights, its hood raised, its million-dollar engine silent, its dashboard flashing red warnings that no one could explain. For 3 nights, Charlotte's best technicians had lived on black coffee, cold pizza, and pride, plugging in scanners, replacing sensors, whispering excuses beneath the polished banners that carried her family name. Tomorrow morning, investors from Chicago and Dallas would arrive. By noon, cameras would be pointed at that car. By sunset, if the engine failed, the board would vote to sell the company her father had built from a 2-bay garage outside Fort Worth. "Try it again," Charlotte said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hum of the lights. Brent Callahan, her head technician, gave a stiff nod and turned the ignition. The engine coughed once, hard and uneven, then died with a sound that made the room feel smaller. A red warning flashed across the monitor. Fuel pressure unstable. Ignition sequence failed. System fault unknown. Brent slapped the dashboard softly, as if the machine had embarrassed him on purpose. "Same thing," he muttered. "The computer's lying to us." Near the door, Caleb Mercer stopped walking. He had only come to deliver a rebuilt pump assembly and collect a past-due payment for a roadside job the dealership still owed him. His boots were worn. His jacket carried old grease at the cuffs. Beside him, 8-year-old Annie held a math worksheet against her chest and stared at the cars that shone brighter than anything in their apartment parking lot. Caleb listened to the dying engine the way some men listen to weather. Not with panic. Not with ego. With quiet. With dignity. With a kind of respect that machines seem to answer. "That's not a software fault," he said softly. The room went still for half a second, then Brent turned, smiling like he had been handed entertainment. "Excuse me." Caleb shifted the box under his arm. "Somebody changed the regulator, or the line feeding it is pulsing wrong. That knock before shutdown wasn't timing. It was starvation." A few technicians laughed under their breath. One salesman near the coffee bar smirked. Brent walked toward Caleb slowly, wiping his hands on a clean towel that had no oil on it. "And you figured that out from over there?" "I heard it," Caleb said. "You heard it," Brent repeated, louder now, inviting the room to enjoy the joke. "Ma'am, this is a 600 horsepower prototype with a closed-loop hybrid performance system. We have factory software, diagnostic equipment, and certified engineers in this room. He delivers parts out of a pickup." Annie lowered her eyes. Caleb did not. He only placed one hand gently on his daughter's shoulder, steadying her before he steadied himself. Charlotte stepped down from the platform, heels clicking against the polished floor, her face pale with exhaustion and control. She looked Caleb over once, from the frayed collar to the work-worn hands. "Mr. Mercer, thank you for the delivery," she said. "But this vehicle is not your concern." Caleb nodded, as if the words had not touched anything tender. "Yes, ma'am." Then the monitor behind Brent flickered again, and the engine bay released a faint hiss, small enough that most people missed it. Caleb turned his head. "Just slightly. Just enough. If you start it one more time like that," he said, "you'll burn the left side injector rail before sunrise." No one laughed then. Brent's smile tightened. Charlotte looked back at the car, then at the scanner, then at Caleb. Outside, rain began tapping the showroom glass, soft at first, like fingers asking to be let in. Inside, under all that expensive light, a man everyone had already dismissed stood quietly beside his daughter and waited. He had not raised his voice. He had not asked to be believed. But for the first time that night, the most powerful woman in the building wondered if the stranger in the old jacket could hear something the rest of them were too proud to notice. Caleb Mercer had learned a long time ago that rich rooms could make poor men feel smaller if they let them. The marble floor, the glass walls, the soft leather chairs, the quiet smell of new cars and expensive coffee, all of it was designed to make a man notice what he did not own. But Caleb did not look at the price tags. He looked at Annie. She stood beside him in her faded denim jacket, her blonde hair tucked behind one ear, holding her school worksheet with both hands as if it were something breakable. She had been sitting in his old truck for 40 minutes before the rain started coming down harder, so he had brought her inside. There was no one at home to watch her, no neighbor free on a school night, no family close enough to call. It had been that way since her mother passed, just Caleb, Annie, and the long list of things that still had to be paid for. Brent noticed the girl and smiled in a way that was almost polite, which somehow made it worse. "You brought your kid to a delivery run?" he asked. Caleb kept his voice calm. "She had homework. I had work." "This is not a daycare," Brent said. And that is not an answer. A few people looked away, not because they disagreed, but because disrespect is easier to hear when no one expects you to stop it. Annie's fingers tightened around the paper. Caleb felt it. He crouched beside her, slow and steady, so his eyes were level with hers. "Do you remember what I told you?" he asked. Annie nodded, but her voice was small. "People can be loud and still be wrong." Caleb smiled gently. "That is right." The words landed softly, but they traveled farther than he meant them to. Martha Ellis, the gray-haired receptionist near the front desk, heard them and looked up from her computer. Charlotte heard them too. She stood near the prototype, arms folded, trying not to show how badly the night was slipping out of her control. Caleb rose and turned back toward Brent. "I am not here to be in anyone's way. I am here because your accounts office said my check would be ready after 5. Brent gave a short laugh. "For that roadside alternator patch last month?" "For the roadside alternator repair that got your customer and his family to Oklahoma City before midnight," Caleb said. "There is a difference." That quiet correction took the smile off one young technician's face. "Not all of it, but enough." Charlotte glanced toward her assistant. "Do we owe him money?" The assistant checked a tablet, then hesitated. "Yes, ma'am. $280. Invoice pending approval." Caleb looked down at Annie's worksheet. $280. It was not a fortune in that building. It was less than the leather floor mats on half the cars in the room. But it was Annie's field trip fee, groceries until Friday, and enough gas to keep his pickup running through another week of school drop-offs and late-night calls. Brent waved a hand dismissively. "Fine. Cut him a check and let him go." Martha stood before anyone else moved. "I can help with that." Her voice was warm, careful, human. She walked around the desk and smiled at Annie. "Would you like some hot cocoa while your dad waits?" Annie looked at Caleb first. She always did. He nodded once. "Yes, please," she said. "Thank you." Martha's smile softened, and for the first time that night, Annie's shoulders lowered. Caleb watched his daughter follow the kind woman toward the waiting area, past the coffee machine and the wall of framed awards. Then the prototype hissed again behind him, faint and uneven, like a secret trying not to be heard. Caleb closed his eyes for one breath. He did not want to get involved. He did not want to step back into rooms where pride wore clean shirts and called itself expertise. But Annie needed that check, and Charlotte Whitmore needed a miracle she did not yet know how to ask for. When Caleb opened his eyes, Charlotte was watching him. Not with trust. Not yet. But with something quieter than doubt. Charlotte Whitmore had not inherited weakness, but she had inherited pressure. It lived in the walls of Whitmore Crest Motors, behind every framed photograph of her father shaking hands with mayors, racing legends, and men who once told him a family dealership could never become a national name. Now those same walls seemed to lean toward her as the rain tapped harder against the showroom glass. She stood beside the dead prototype, hearing the soft clicks of cooling metal, and tried to ignore the board members calling every 15 minutes from their hotel downtown. "Do we have an update?" one had asked. "Can we still demonstrate tomorrow?" another had said. "Charlotte, sentiment cannot protect market value." That last sentence stayed with her because it sounded like everything she hated about business and everything she had trained herself to become. Brent stood near the driver's door, arms folded, still pretending confidence. "We can push the demo," he said. "Blame shipping damage, software delay, anything." Charlotte did not look at him. "The investors flew in from 3 states. Then give them dinner and a tour." "They did not come for dinner." Her voice was low, controlled, but the people closest to her heard the crack beneath it. The prototype was not just a car. It was the first vehicle ever developed under the Whitmore-Crest Performance Partnership, the machine her father had dreamed about before his heart gave out behind his old oak desk 2 years earlier. He had called it proof that a dealership could be more than a place where people negotiated monthly payments. It could be a bridge between working hands and American engineering, between old promises and new roads. If the demo failed, the board would not just cancel a project. They would sell the company to Northlake Automotive Group, the same rival that had spent years trying to bury the Whitmore name under polished branding and cheaper loyalty. Charlotte turned to Caleb, who was standing quietly near the service counter with rainwater darkening the shoulders of his jacket. "You said the regulator was wrong." "I said it sounded wrong." Brent scoffed. "That is not a diagnosis." Caleb looked at him. "Neither is guessing with a scanner until sunrise." The room went quiet. Not because Caleb had spoken loudly. He had not. It was the steadiness that changed the air. Charlotte studied his face. There was no ambition in it, no hunger to impress, none of the nervous excitement men usually showed when they thought they had found a doorway into her world. He looked tired. He looked poor. He looked like a father who wanted to collect a check and take his daughter home. And somehow, that made him harder to dismiss. "What would you need?" she asked. Brent turned sharply. "Charlotte, you cannot be serious." She held up one hand, still looking at Caleb. "What would you need?" Caleb glanced toward the waiting area, where Annie sat with her cocoa while Martha helped her erase a math problem. His eyes softened for half a breath, then returned to the car. "1 hour," he said. "No interruptions. Access to the service bay, the fuel map printout, and the last 3 maintenance logs." "And payment?" Charlotte asked. Caleb shook his head. "Pay me what you owe me. Nothing more unless I am right." Brent laughed once, bitter and small. "This is absurd." Caleb turned back to Charlotte. "I cannot promise to save your company, ma'am. I can only promise I will tell the truth about what is broken." For a moment, Charlotte heard her father's voice in that sentence. Not the exact words, but the weight of them. He had believed machines told the truth before people did. He had believed a good mechanic listened before he touched a wrench. Outside, thunder rolled low over the city. Inside, the red warning light blinked across the dashboard like a countdown. Charlotte looked at the car, then at the boardroom windows above them, then at the little girl in the waiting area pretending not to watch her father be judged. 1 hour, she said. Brent's face hardened. Caleb only nodded. No smile. No victory. No performance. He walked toward the prototype with the quiet grace of a man stepping not into opportunity, but into responsibility. Caleb did not reach for the scanner first. That was the first thing Charlotte noticed. Every certified technician in her building had treated the prototype like a computer with wheels, but Caleb treated it like something alive enough to speak if someone had the patience to listen. He stood beside the open hood for 10 quiet seconds while the service bay settled around him. Rain whispered against the high windows. Fluorescent lights hummed over the polished concrete. Somewhere in the waiting area, Annie's pencil scratched softly across her worksheet while Martha murmured encouragement over a subtraction problem. Brent leaned against a tool cabinet with his arms crossed, wearing the satisfied expression of a man waiting for failure to arrive on schedule. "Clock is ticking," he said. Caleb did not answer. He placed one hand near the intake housing, not touching anything hot, only feeling the faint vibration left in the metal. Then he bent closer and breathed in. Fuel. Warm plastic. A trace of electrical heat. Not burnt enough to be disaster, but wrong enough to be a warning. "You going to smell it back to life?" Brent asked. A young technician laughed, then stopped when Charlotte did not. Caleb opened his toolbox. It was old, steel, dented along the corners, the kind of box a man keeps not because it looks professional, but because it has survived with him. He removed a small flashlight, a 1/4-inch drive ratchet, and a folded inspection mirror wrapped in a clean shop towel. "Last maintenance log," he said. Charlotte's assistant handed him the printout. Caleb read it once, then again, his thumb stopping halfway down the page. "Fuel rail was inspected yesterday." "By me," Brent said. "Pressure tested, cleared, and documented." Caleb nodded slowly. "Who signed after you?" Brent's smile faded just a little. "No one. I run this bay." Caleb looked at the engine. "Then someone came after you." The room changed. Not dramatically. Not loudly. But the air tightened, the way a church goes quiet when a hard truth steps inside. Brent pushed off the cabinet. "That is a serious thing to suggest." "It is a serious sound," Caleb replied. He loosened one small cover near the left side assembly, careful, unhurried, every movement clean enough to make the younger technician stop whispering. Underneath, he found a thin smear of fresh oil on a bolt that should have been dry. He held the flashlight low. This was opened. Brent stepped closer. Lots of things get opened in a service bay. Not with the wrong socket. Caleb pointed to the faint rounding on the bolt head. "Your team uses 12-point chrome sockets. This mark came from a cheap 6-point impact socket, 1/2-inch drive, too much torque, fast hands." Charlotte's eyes moved from the bolt to Brent. Brent laughed, but there was no warmth in it now. "That is guesswork." Caleb reached deeper with the mirror, angling the light until a narrow brass fitting caught the reflection. He stared at it, then closed his eyes for one breath, as if listening again to the engine dying in his memory. "Start it for 2 seconds," he said. Charlotte stiffened. "You said not to start it again." "Not for longer than 2 seconds." Brent shook his head. "Absolutely not." Caleb looked at Charlotte, calm and direct. "Ma'am, if I am wrong, I will walk out and you can keep the $280 until Monday. If I am right, you will hear it." Charlotte held his gaze. Then she nodded. Brent muttered under his breath but reached into the car. The engine turned over. 1 second. A cough. 2 seconds. Caleb raised his hand. "Stop." Silence dropped fast. Caleb pointed to the line beneath the cover. There. A tiny pulse of fuel mist had appeared and vanished, so fine it looked almost like breath in cold air. Caleb wiped it with a white cloth, then held the cloth up under the light. "The car is not broken," he said. "It is being starved by a part that does not belong here." Charlotte stepped closer, her face no longer hard, only focused. "Can you fix it?" Caleb looked toward Annie, asleep now with her head tilted against Martha's folded sweater, the cocoa cup empty beside her. Then he looked back at the wounded machine, the anxious CEO, and the proud men who had stopped laughing. "Not in 1 hour," he said. "If you want it running by morning, I will need the night." By 10:47 that night, Whitmore Crest Motors no longer looked like a showroom. It looked like a cathedral after the congregation had gone home, all glass, shadow, and waiting. The sales desks were dark. The espresso machine was silent. Outside, rain slid down the tall windows in silver lines, blurring the city lights into soft streaks of gold and red. In the service bay, only one corner still glowed, where Caleb Mercer worked beneath the open hood with his sleeves rolled up and his old toolbox resting near his boots. He had moved Annie to the leather couch in the customer lounge after Martha found a clean blanket from the employee break room. The little girl slept curled on her side, one hand tucked beneath her cheek, her unfinished math worksheet resting on the table beside her empty cocoa cup. Every few minutes, Caleb looked over to make sure she was warm. Every time, his face changed. Not much. Just enough to remind anyone watching that before he was a mechanic, before he was a man with secrets, he was a father. Charlotte stood on the upper office balcony with a paper cup of coffee cooling in her hand. She had meant to return to calls, contracts, emergency statements, all the things a chief executive officer was supposed to control when everything else was falling apart. But she could not stop watching him. Caleb did not rush. He did not curse the machine. He did not throw tools or blame the last person who touched it. He labeled every connector with blue tape, placed every bolt in order, wiped each part before setting it down. There was a reverence in the way he worked, the kind her father used to have when he walked through the first service garage before sunrise, greeting mechanics by name, saying a clean bay was not about appearance, it was about respect. Brent had disappeared into his office after midnight, claiming he needed to review vendor records. Most of the technicians had gone quiet, their earlier laughter buried under embarrassment. Only two stayed behind, pretending to organize carts while really studying Caleb's hands. One of them finally asked, "How did you know to check the rail first?" Caleb did not look up. "I did not know." "Then what made you start there?" "The engine told me where it hurt." The young man blinked, unsure whether to smile. Caleb tightened a fitting by hand before reaching for the torque wrench. Machines do not lie. People do. Pride does. Fear does. But a machine will tell you the truth if you stop trying to make it say what you want. Charlotte came down the stairs slowly. Her heels sounded softer now against the concrete. She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the oil across his knuckles and the fine gray beginning at his temples. "You talk like someone who has done more than roadside repairs," she said. Caleb kept his eyes on the engine. "Everybody has done more than what strangers assume." It was not sharp. That made it sharper. Charlotte looked toward the lounge, where Annie slept under the blanket Martha had given her. "Her mother?" she asked gently. Caleb paused. The wrench clicked once in his hand. "Gone 4 years." Charlotte lowered her eyes. "I am sorry." "So am I," Caleb said, and there was no bitterness in it, only the tired honesty of a man who had said those words to himself too many nights. He reached into his toolbox for a small light and, for a moment, a faded photograph slipped partly out from beneath a stack of shop towels. Charlotte saw it before he tucked it back. Caleb younger, smiling beside a silver race car. A woman with windblown hair holding baby Annie. Behind them, on the car's side panel, were the words Mercer Dynamics. Charlotte felt something move in her memory. Her father's old notebooks. A name written in blue ink. A sentence she had never understood. "Find Mercer if the heart ever stops." Caleb noticed her silence but did not explain. He only leaned back over the engine, the rain whispering above them, the city holding its breath outside the glass. And Charlotte, who had spent years trusting titles, credentials, and polished confidence, began to understand that the man in front of her had not come from nowhere. He had walked away from somewhere. By 12:26 in the morning, Charlotte Whitmore was standing in her father's old office with a cardboard box of notebooks open on the desk and rain ticking against the windows behind her. She had not meant to search through his things. She had told herself she was looking for vendor notes, early engineering contacts, anything that might explain why the name Mercer Dynamics felt like a match struck in the dark. But the moment she opened the third notebook, she knew this was not about vendors. Her father's handwriting filled the yellowed pages in blue ink, slanted and impatient, the way he wrote when an idea was moving faster than his hand could follow. Orem V8 Hybrid Platform. Fuel rhythm irregular under load. Only one man hears it before the sensors do. Caleb Mercer. Charlotte stopped breathing for a second. Downstairs, beyond the glass wall of the office, Caleb was still bent over the prototype, working beneath a suspended light while two younger technicians watched in respectful silence. He did not know she had found the name. He did not know that in her father's private notes, he was not described as a contractor, a mechanic, or a roadside repairman. He was described as the finest engine mind her father had ever met. Charlotte turned the page. There was a photograph tucked between two sheets, faded at the edges. Her father stood beside a silver test car at a proving ground in Arizona, one hand on the fender, smiling into the sun. Beside him stood a younger Caleb Mercer, thinner, brighter, wearing a Mercer Dynamics shirt and holding baby Annie in one arm while a woman leaned against his shoulder. On the back of the photo, her father had written, "Caleb does not build fast engines. He builds honest ones." Charlotte sat slowly in the leather chair. The room felt different now. The trophies on the shelves, the framed magazine covers, the first dollar bill from her father's original garage, all of it seemed to look back at her with quiet judgment. She had almost sent Caleb away. Worse than that, she had allowed others to laugh at him. She had allowed a man with tired eyes and a sleeping child to be measured by his jacket instead of his character. Martha appeared in the doorway holding two fresh coffees. She looked at the notebook, then at Charlotte's face. "You found it, did you not?" Charlotte looked up. "You knew." Martha stepped inside. "I did not know for certain. But I remembered the name. Your father used to say some people fix machines because they understand parts, and some fix them because they understand loss." Charlotte looked through the glass again. Caleb had removed a compact component from the left side assembly and placed it on a white towel. He turned it under the light with careful fingers, then compared it to a specification sheet. His shoulders were still. Too still. Why would someone like him disappear? Charlotte asked. Martha's voice softened. Maybe because being seen cost him too much. The answer followed Charlotte down the stairs and back into the service bay. Caleb did not look up when she approached. "This regulator is counterfeit," he said. "Not cheap exactly. Just wrong in the one way that matters." Charlotte placed the old photograph on the tool cart beside him. Caleb's hand stopped above the towel. For the first time all night, his calm cracked, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the past to enter the room. "Where did you get that?" he asked. "My father kept it." Caleb stared at the picture of the younger man he used to be, the wife he had loved, the child now sleeping 20 feet away, and the life that had once seemed wide open. "He was a good man," Caleb said. "He believed in you." Caleb swallowed, then folded the photograph gently and set it face down, as if even memory deserved privacy. "People believed in a lot of things back then." Charlotte's voice lowered. "You designed the platform this car is built on." One of the young technicians looked up sharply. Brent's office door remained closed, but the service bay itself seemed to hear the truth. Caleb wiped his hands on a shop towel. "I helped with the early system. That was another lifetime. Why leave it?" Charlotte asked. Caleb looked toward Annie, asleep beneath the blanket, her small face peaceful under the dim lounge light. "Because after my wife died, every engine I built sounded like time I had spent away from home. I did not want applause. I wanted to make breakfast. Pack lunches. Be there when my little girl woke up scared." The room settled into a deep, respectful silence. Not pity. Not curiosity. Respect. Then Caleb picked up the counterfeit regulator and held it beneath the light. "But this," he said quietly, "this was not failure. This was placed here on purpose." Charlotte's eyes sharpened. "You are sure?" Caleb nodded once. "Your car did not break down, Miss Whitmore. Someone inside this building wanted it to fail." At 3:48 in the morning, the rain had softened into a mist, and the dealership felt almost too quiet, as if the building itself was listening for the name of the person who had betrayed it. Caleb placed the counterfeit regulator inside a clear parts bag and wrote the time on a strip of blue tape. Charlotte stood beside him, no longer wearing the expression of a chief executive officer trying to protect a brand, but of a daughter realizing someone had tried to bury her father's final dream beneath a lie. Who had access? Caleb asked. Charlotte looked toward the dark offices behind the service bay. Technicians, senior staff, security, and Brent. One of the younger technicians shifted uncomfortably. Brent handled the last inspection. Caleb did not accuse anyone. He only nodded and kept working, because truth did not need to be rushed. It only needed room to breathe. He installed the correct component from a sealed emergency kit, checked the fuel line, cleaned the rail, and recalibrated the pressure sequence by hand before allowing the software to read it. Charlotte watched every movement, seeing now what she had missed before. His confidence was not pride. It was discipline. His silence was not weakness. It was grace under weight. From the lounge, Annie stirred beneath the blanket. Her eyes opened slowly, confused by the dim lights and the strange beauty of the showroom after midnight. Martha whispered, "It is all right, sweetheart. Your dad is still right there." Annie sat up, rubbing one eye. That was when she saw Brent Callahan step out from the side hallway near the security room. He moved quietly, holding a tablet against his chest, his face tight with purpose. He did not see Annie awake behind the low partition. He walked straight toward Caleb's tool cart. "You should be finished by now," Brent said. Caleb turned, calm. "Almost." Brent looked at the clear parts bag. "What is that?" "The reason the engine kept failing. Looks like a bad part. It was installed after your inspection." Brent's jaw flexed. "Careful." Charlotte stepped forward. "Brent, where were you between 10 and 11 last night?" He gave her a wounded look, polished and practiced. "Are you questioning me because some delivery mechanic found a loose fitting?" Caleb picked up the bag and held it under the light. "Not loose. Wrong. Same housing, different internal spring rate, wrong pressure response. It was chosen by someone who understood enough to cause failure, but not enough to hide from someone who understands why engines breathe." Brent's eyes flicked toward the security hallway. A small movement. Almost nothing. Caleb saw it. Charlotte saw Caleb see it. "The cameras will show who came into the bay," Charlotte said. Brent smiled then, but it was thin as paper. "No, they will not. The system reset during the storm. Happens all the time." Behind the partition, Annie's small hand moved toward her father's phone, which he had left on the lounge table when he carried her inside earlier. She did not fully understand grown-up betrayal. But she understood tone. She understood when someone was trying to make her father small. The phone screen lit. The voice recorder app, the one Caleb used to remember parts lists and school reminders, was still open from earlier. Annie pressed the red button. Brent stepped closer to Caleb, lowering his voice. "Take your check, take your kid, and go home. You do not belong in this room, Mercer. Men like you get used, blamed, and forgotten." Caleb did not move back. "I have been forgotten before." "Then you should be good at it." Charlotte's face went still. The young technicians looked down. Even Martha, gentle Martha, drew a slow breath as if holding back words she did not want Annie to hear. Brent continued, quieter, meaner, certain the cameras were gone and the room was too tired to resist him. "Northlake will own this place by Friday. The board already wants her gone. All I had to do was make sure the car embarrassed her in front of the investors. You cannot stop a sale with a wrench and a bedtime story." Caleb looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, but with sorrow. "You were trusted with something people built." Brent gave a cold little laugh. "Trust does not pay what winning pays." Then a small voice came from the lounge. "Daddy?" Everyone turned. Annie stood barefoot beside the couch, holding the phone in both hands. The red recording timer glowed on the screen. Brent's face changed. Not much. Just enough for the truth to show. Caleb walked to Annie and knelt before her. "You okay, sweetheart?" She nodded, eyes wide. "I think I saved what he said." Caleb took the phone gently, then looked back at Charlotte. No speeches. No triumph. No raised voice. Just truth, sitting quietly in a child's hands. Charlotte reached for the phone, and in that moment, the power in the room shifted away from money, titles, and fear. It moved toward a tired single father, a brave little girl, and the simple dignity of evidence no one could laugh away. By 8:30 the next morning, Whitmore Crest Motors had transformed itself back into a place that pretended nothing had gone wrong. The floors had been polished until they reflected the ceiling lights like water. Fresh coffee steamed near the hospitality counter. Sales associates stood in dark suits with practiced smiles, and a row of investors waited beneath the chrome letters of the Whitmore name, checking watches from Chicago time, Dallas time, and New York time. But beneath the shine, the truth of the night still moved quietly through the room. Caleb stood near the service entrance in the same oil-marked jacket, his eyes shadowed from no sleep, his hands clean now but still rough from the work. Annie sat beside Martha at the reception desk, wrapped in the same blanket, eating a blueberry muffin someone had warmed for her. Charlotte stood by the prototype, wearing a navy blazer and the calm expression of a woman who had already decided what kind of leader she would be when it mattered. Brent arrived late, freshly shaved, tie perfect, confidence arranged across his face like nothing had happened. He looked at Caleb, then at Charlotte, then at the investors. "Before we begin," Brent said loudly, "I believe we should address a serious issue." An outside individual was allowed unsupervised access to our prototype overnight. The room shifted. Phones lowered. Board members exchanged quick glances. Caleb did not react. He simply looked toward Annie, making sure she was all right. Brent stepped forward, playing to the room now. "I warned against this. We do not know what he changed. We do not know what damage he caused. If this demonstration fails, responsibility should be placed where it belongs." A few hours earlier, those words might have worked. In another room, with another audience, a poor man in an old jacket might have been easier to blame than a polished department head. That is how injustice survives. It dresses itself in confidence and asks everyone to ignore the quiet person holding the truth. Charlotte let the silence stretch until Brent's smile weakened. Then she turned to the investors, the board, the employees, and the young technicians who had watched Caleb work through the night. "Mr. Callahan is correct about one thing," she said. "We do need to address what happened overnight." Brent's shoulders lowered, thinking she had chosen him. Charlotte continued, her voice steady. "This vehicle did not fail because of manufacturing. It did not fail because of software. It failed because someone inside this building installed a counterfeit regulator with the intent to sabotage this demonstration." A murmur moved across the showroom. Brent's face hardened. "That is outrageous." Charlotte lifted Caleb's phone. "We have a recorded admission. We have the part. We have the maintenance timeline. And we have a witness who was brave enough to press record when adults forgot the meaning of integrity." Every eye turned toward Annie. Caleb gently stepped closer to her, not to hide her, but to protect her from the weight of the room. Charlotte looked back at Brent, and there was no anger in her face now, only clean judgment. "You were trusted with my father's work. You chose a paycheck from Northlake instead." Brent opened his mouth, but no defense came out strong enough to stand. Security approached calmly from the side. There was no scene, no shouting, no spectacle. Just a man in a perfect tie walking out under the same lights where he had tried to bury the truth. Then Charlotte turned to Caleb. "Mr. Mercer, the floor is yours." Caleb looked at the prototype, then at the people waiting for proof. He did not explain his past. He did not mention Mercer Dynamics. He did not tell them that the engine beneath that had carried ideas he had once helped shape. He only walked to the driver's side with the quiet grace of someone who knew that dignity does not need an audience, even when an audience finally arrives. He sat down, placed one hand on the wheel, and closed his eyes for one breath. The room held still. Charlotte's hands folded in front of her. Martha stopped moving. Annie whispered, "Come on, Dad." Caleb turned the key. The engine caught at once. Not with a cough, not with a warning, but with a deep, clean roar that rolled through the showroom like a heart remembering how to beat. The investors froze. The board members stared. The technicians who had laughed the night before stood speechless beside their tool carts. Charlotte looked toward her father's name on the wall, then back at Caleb Mercer. No one clapped at first. No one knew how to. Because some moments do not ask for noise. They ask for respect. And in that bright American showroom, surrounded by money, glass, and pride, the single father everyone had underestimated sat behind the wheel while the entire room fell silent. The silence after the engine roared was not empty. It was full of everything the room had refused to see the night before. Caleb Mercer sat behind the wheel for one steady breath, then shut the engine down with the same care he had used to bring it back to life. No victory smile crossed his face. No speech came from his mouth. He simply stepped out, wiped one faint mark from the door frame with a clean cloth, and handed the key to Charlotte Whitmore. The investors signed before noon. The board members, who had arrived prepared to discuss selling the company, now stood beside the conference table with their folders closed and their arguments gone. Northlake Automotive Group withdrew its offer by lunch, once word spread that the attempted sabotage had been documented, witnessed, and stopped. But to Caleb, the largest miracle of that morning was not the contract. It was Annie running across the polished showroom floor and wrapping both arms around his waist like the whole world had finally caught up to what she had known all along. "You fixed it," she whispered. Caleb rested a hand on the back of her head. "We fixed enough for today." Charlotte watched them from a few feet away, holding her father's old notebook against her chest. For years, she had believed leadership meant never needing anyone. She had worn control like armor, polished and heavy, until it kept out kindness as easily as it kept out fear. But that morning, looking at the tired single father and the brave little girl who had saved the truth with a phone recording, Charlotte understood something her father had tried to teach her long before she was ready to hear it. A company is not saved by the loudest person in the room. It is saved by the person who still chooses honesty when no one is clapping. She walked toward Caleb slowly. The employees fell quiet again, but this time the silence was not shame. It was respect. "Mr. Mercer," Charlotte said, "I owe you more than an apology." Caleb looked at her. "The apology is enough." "No," she said gently. "It is not." She turned so everyone could hear her. "Last night, I judged a man by his jacket, his job, and the fact that he did not look like the people I was trained to trust. I was wrong. This company was built by working hands. If we forget how to respect them, then we do not deserve my father's name on that wall." Several technicians lowered their eyes. One of them, the young man who had laughed first, stepped forward and said quietly, "I am sorry, sir." Caleb nodded. "Learn from it. That is better than carrying shame around." Charlotte opened the notebook and removed a folded page. It was one of her father's sketches of the original Orem system, the same platform Caleb had helped shape years earlier. At the bottom, in blue ink, were the words, "A good engine needs pressure. A good man needs respect." Caleb read the sentence twice. His eyes softened, but he did not let the room turn his grief into entertainment. He folded the page carefully and gave it back. "Your father understood things," he said. Charlotte took a breath. "I want you to come back. Not as a contractor. Not as a man we call only when everything is broken. I want you to lead engineering here. The room waited. Caleb looked at Annie. She smiled at him, sleepy and proud, crumbs from her muffin still at the corner of her mouth. Dad, she said, maybe this is the part where they finally see you. Caleb looked at the service bay, at the young technicians, at Martha wiping one quiet tear behind the reception desk, and at the name Whitmore shining above the showroom in morning light. I will accept, he said, on one condition. Charlotte nodded. Name it. Caleb's voice stayed low, but it carried across every polished inch of that building. No one in this garage gets treated like they are invisible. Not the janitor. Not the receptionist. Not the kid sweeping floors after school. Not the single parent trying to make it through another week. If I build anything here, I build that first. Charlotte did not hesitate. Agreed. Months later, people would talk about the deal, the prototype, and the morning a forgotten engineer saved Whitmore Crest Motors. But those who were there remembered something quieter. They remembered a little girl asleep under a receptionist's blanket. They remembered a woman powerful enough to admit she had been wrong. They remembered a man who did not raise his voice to prove his worth. And when the first new engine rolled out of that service bay under Caleb Mercer's leadership, he did not stand in front for the photograph. He stood beside Annie, behind the young technicians, one hand resting gently on her shoulder. Because dignity had never needed a spotlight. It only needed the truth, and at last, the truth had been heard.